Good morning, everyone. I cut this video earlier this week, and the person that I'm in conversation with in this video, and the tone that I adopted, was specifically because I just couldn't really figure out why they would say things with such hostility. The guy seems to be pretty good-natured in a lot of his other videos. I don't agree with him about a lot of things, and he is making some other videos where he doesn't seem to be so combative, and he's even said things in direct contradiction to this. But I think it's still an interesting way of approaching this. I set this video in the world of Bizzarre-o because it just felt bizarre to me. I hope that you enjoy it for what it is and for the kind of conversation about civility that it may provoke. Have a good one. Enter with me through the door to a mirror image of my channel, where some things will be very different. The object of this episode is to teach a lesson in civility and to talk about one of the usual challenging topics that interest me so much and which I like to delve into in depth. And now, without further ado, good morning. Today we're going to go to Bizzarre-o-world. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1. What is up, guys? Welcome to the Complex Games Apologist, a YouTube channel for anyone who's interested in taking their relationship with the tabletop role-playing hobby beyond the bare bones. For anyone who's interested in leveling up their skills at the tabletop and exploring the universe of possibilities that's out there in tabletop gaming. Let's go! Now, in all seriousness, that's obviously not the kind of channel identity that I've chosen for myself. And let me tell you, I really do enjoy a lot of the content put out by channels that have that sort of bubbly take on things. I've just chosen to take my channel down a little bit of a different path. As you know, I've made some of the banner videos on my channel about campaign settings, which some folks would call source books. And I've also made a few videos about starting your game and how to begin, and what sort of advice I have to you about how to create a successful campaign. I think there's a wide variety of tastes in the hobby, and I think that there are things on some channels that I really wouldn't go into or that I would approach very differently. And so long as those channels are finding their audience and engaging with it, and really expressing the diversity and the variety of preferences and opinions that exist within the hobby, then so much the better. Different strokes for different folks, you might say. So now climb aboard the starship as we blast off to Bizzarre-o-world. Okay, so now it may seem that I'm taking this video on a sharp right-hand turn, but trust me, it's all gonna come together. I think that pre-generated characters are fun. I think that sometimes they're an expedient and necessary thing when you are running a variety of different kinds of games. I've enjoyed playing them in organized play circumstances, and I've also enjoyed playing them or an NPC when I'm dropping in on a game, maybe trying out a particular group, and I'm not particularly sure if the social environment is really a great fit. And we'll go into more depth about sort of the circumstances of why I think that pre-generated characters have their place. But suffice it to say, I think that there are some people watching this video who may agree that pre-gens have their place, and perhaps even that they've enjoyed using them in some way or another. But as it turns out, there's someone out there in the internet who doesn't agree.
Hi, this is Scott Garibay. I do not think that any Dungeon Master should ever run pre-gens in any game ever. Not under any circumstance.
And what's more, there's something deeply wrong with my understanding of the hobby, and perhaps yours too.
Running a pre-gen is a fundamental misunderstanding of dungeon mastering, of what excites players, and what is a Dungeons & Dragons game.
But it's alright, you can be forgiven. I've fed you hot garbage on my channel.
I have sympathy for people who have used pre-gens. And the reason why is the internet, through blogs and now videos, is absolutely filled with utter nonsense on how to run a Dungeons & Dragons game. Right? You've got to find the wisdom. And right now, there's just a ton of commentary out there, session zeros, coverage of source books, just ridiculous stuff like that nobody should be doing, right?
Like, remember this video where I suggested that you circumscribe some of the options for races and classes as you begin your game so that you have a more focused and coherent world, and so that some of the races and the class options can be things that your players are really in touch with, that the NPCs and the allies of their race will be able to find their way onto camera.
No, that Dungeon Master is wrong. You cannot restrict player cannot restrict player character choices so that you can tell some precious little game, right? You choose worlds that have portals so that when I come and I say, okay, it's time to play Dungeons and Dragons, there is never a point where I say, hey, here's what you get to pick from. Dungeon Masters should never be telling players what to pick from. You know what the players get to pick from? Every single thing that Wizards of the Coast has ever published, including Unearthed Arcana. Everything.
Well, I guess I got that run wrong too. I guess I should have checked if that kind of content should be made.
Like that nobody should be doing, right?
So first, to summarize and to restate some of Mr. Garibay's key theses in this argument. First, he argues that pre-generated characters deprive a unique moment of agency and engagement for the player. It's a place where they pick their character by looking in the book. So first, yes, I do agree that player engagement could be much less, especially if all the players at the table are made to choose pre-gens. But I think that it's often the case that this is actually a mischaracterization of how people use pre-gens. They often take them as a template and they begin to swapping out various pieces. The halfling rogue from Lost Mine of Phandelver quickly becomes the human rogue who uses thrown spears rather than a sling or thrown dagger. And outside of the Dungeons & Dragons context, because the character generation systems can often be a minigame unto themselves, or it can be difficult to see what kind of options are good and useful in the game versus what sort of options are tangential to the campaign, either because of sort of the subject matter of this particular campaign or just because there's a great deal of depth within the rules, then I think pre-gens have their uses there, especially to serve in a didactic role to show sort of what's the middle of the road. I'll go into a little bit more depth about my own ideas on this topic in just a moment, but for now, let's dwell momentarily on this remark right here.
You have taken away the most engaging part from the player, which is the player is going to say, this race excites me, this class excites me, this combination excites me. I have chosen from the beginning what I will play. And because I have had freedom and liberty in that choice, I am now engaged, okay? And honestly, there's a lot in that, right? So let's say that somebody, that a player really can't decide. Well, that person shouldn't play. If you don't see a race and class combination that excites you, you really shouldn't be at the table. Right? And that's my contention, right? And you are you're losing that opportunity to realize that person shouldn't be at the table.
Wow. Just wow.
You're giving yourself a clue to realize that a player really shouldn't even be in the game, right?
Wow. Just wow. I can't imagine a more wildly different position than I have about receiving someone at the table. I really am not of a mind to second guess whether you should be playing before I've even rolled dice with you and started playing. If you have the enthusiasm and you have the wherewithal to sort of get in there and mix it up with a new dungeon master and with a new group, if you're just trying the hobby out, I want to make things pretty accessible. And if that means starting on your terms by not reading the rulebook and maybe just having a minimal commitment to creating a character, that's fine. That's fine. We'll just see how it goes. Maybe you will want to roll a new character next time. I ran more than a few sessions of Adventure League just as 5th edition came out, and it was great fun. And a lot of folks were using the pre-gens out of Lost Mine of Phandelver, and it didn't do them the worse for wear. They were excellent and interesting role players playing through a beginning adventure. It was a fun time. So secondly, Mr. Garibay posits that there's sort of a fundamental infringement of the game master upon the player when pre-gens come into play. That the province of the player is everything that's on their character sheet, and the province of the game master is everything else. There's a fair amount more nuance to his position, but I want to point out that at the end of the road, he posits this.
Player characters are untouchable. This goes so deep, right? That one, here's another thing that people don't understand, and I've switched this in my game. It's a mistake I used to make that I don't make anymore, right? We're going to tell the story of a group of soldiers who are on the edge of a demon gate that is opened up in Faerun. and you're all grizzled soldiers. And then you have a player who says, oh, well, I want to play a Kender bard who's an entertainer. And they have a pink pseudo-dragon. You're like, man, that don't fit with my grizzled soldier thing. Man, you got to pick something different.
This is about the point where I begin to speculate whether Mr. Garibay is in fact a troll in the online sense, in that there's sort of an agent provocateur aspect to what's being said here. And I have looked into this on previous occasions for some of his videos, and he has said that he is in fact sincere in all respects for some of those other remarks. So I will take him at his word in this case. Suffice it to say, as you know, I think that tailoring the game and tailoring sort of what the scope of your game will be is really important to having a successful campaign. If you are playing Vampire the Masquerade, the Kindred of the East are not going to fit well into a campaign set in Wichita. And as you may suspect, I believe that when you play in the world of Harn, it should be probably humans only to start with, so that the discovery and the immersion of the really rich setting, the richest parts of that setting, are immediate. And so that the mystique and the mystery and the really enchanting fantasy aspect of the more exotic races is something that's discovered over time.
Dungeon masters play the role of a deity in their world, right? They are choosing what the weather is like. They choose everything. How many non-player characters show up? What non-player characters show up? Dungeon masters control every single aspect of the game. Every single aspect of the game except the player characters. And a dungeon master who knows what they're doing realizes that they must limit themselves. They absolutely must limit themselves to controlling every single thing in the world except the player character. The player character is untouchable by the game master. No dungeon master should ever touch a player character's sheet, right?
Now, of course, I must be incredibly presumptuous and completely missing the point of what the game master's role is. That must have been why I fed you guys hot garbage when I tried to elevate and remember the idea of the game master as an auteur, that maybe you should meet game masters who are great at their craft halfway, and immersing yourself can often mean kind of playing by a few of their opening remarks or opening moves in the game, and that will get your feet very wet and get you falling through the looking glass in ways that you might not have otherwise pursued.
You are really seeing a control issue from the person who is the dungeon master. They are saying, I am not happy with controlling every single thing in this world. My control must extend to the player's choices. And that is fundamentally wrong. Fundamentally wrong. Fundamentally wrong.
Okay, let's get out of Bizzarre-o-world. That's somewhat exhausting for me, being in that kind of space that's so actively combative. I'm ready to just articulate kind of my talk about pre-gens. First of all, I think it's been fun to just kind of pick up a random character sheet and roleplay. Start roleplaying 5 seconds later. I appreciate the challenges of looking down at that character sheet and seeing things that I wouldn't have picked otherwise. In many respects, the same reasons that I think face-to-face play is a realm where you will meet people with preferences and ideas different than your own. It doesn't have the same self-selection bias towards only the sorts of things you like. Well, I think that just randomly drawing out of the pre-gen binder can be very useful. I also think that in a game like GURPS or Shadowrun, where there's a point-buy system, there's sometimes time doesn't allow for someone who's dropped in on a campaign to really get up to speed.
You should rewrite the rules of the game to make it so that you can make a 10-minute, 15-minute character. You can make a character in 10 or 15 minutes. You should sacrifice everything in your game.
And there are also folks whose preferences are toward a dramatic play or towards sort of creating their character as an acting exercise rather than creating their character in the mechanical realm. And for them, looking through the book, and so perhaps they're going to start with one of the archetypes that's in the middle of a Shadowrun core book, and then over time you might allow them to make small adjustments based on kind of swapping out karma values if the payoff in terms of dramaturgy and agency is there once they start playing.
If you don't see a race and class combination that excites you, you really shouldn't be at the table.
Another important utility that I have found for pre-generated characters is for...
Keep your distance, though, Chewie. But don't look like you're trying to keep your distance. I don't know. Fly casual.
Yeah, flying casual. As in, sometimes you just want to see if a group is a good fit. You want to show up for Pathfinder Society play and see what kind of table they're running. Since the pre-gens for Society are sort of middle of the road, they're not super min-maxed, it can be an opportunity to see how judgy people are and kind of how far into the build-itis realm that sort of table of society is. And at the same time, it can be very liberating to say, well, I'm just playing the pre-gen, guys. It's not optimized, and it says that I can totally play the pre-gen, and it's right there in society rules, and you can't stop me. I want to roleplay, and I want to have some fun playing Pathfinder. There's a strong reason to kind of insulate yourself from kind of a toxic table until you know if it's non-toxic. And it can also be a way of interjecting non-toxicity and sort of just bringing things back to roots in those sorts of contexts. And it's quite fun. On top of that, I think that there are a number of genres where pre-gens are probably necessary to kind of help create genre cohesion. That the players can look at the pre-gens and sort of have an idea of what sample characters that will work well within the genre and the campaign that the game master has sketched out. So, that's useful. I mean, I think Star Trek is an especially good one, because that way you can sketch out the entirety of the chain of command. Any slots on the bridge crew that aren't played already have an NPC ready to slide into them. And sometimes, well, you know, sometimes people show up, sometimes characters die, and who's going to step up into that space? Especially in a military sci-fi adventure, I think that's absolutely necessary to have some of those folks around. So in all my time in the hobby, I have never come to a table where the game master forced everyone to use pre-gens. There are a few circumstances that I'm aware of where you might be playing sort of a one-shot, sort of a dramatic play scenario. I think that there is a Luke Crane game that had a Kickstarter where everyone is playing a pre-gen. I don't know if it's exactly a role-playing game, but I would say it is, because you're trying to immerse yourself in the motivations and the context of that particular role. That's what role-playing is to me. Okay, so there was my sort of calm and collected reply to not only why I think that pre-gens are all right by me, but also to some of the more interesting and sort of accusatory aspects of Mr. Garibay's position. I think that there are a wide variety of ways of conceiving the role of the player and the game master. I think that the idea that the player's province, what's on their character sheet, is only theirs and theirs alone, rules out the idea of characters that are flawed, where, say, their alcoholism takes over, and they sort of have an NPC pull on them. They have disadvantages. It also rules out the idea of fear spells. I know a lot of people don't like those. It also rules out the idea of something like having a geas placed on your character. And it also rules out the idea that your character could lose his hand, that he could drink something that drained his charisma or drained his constitution. You could be level drained by a wight. Some of these things are really unpleasant, and a lot of people don't like them at all, but they have been in the hobby for a very long time. And one of the things that Mr. Garibay often harkens to in his assertions is that Gary intended a certain thing.
And then what you have is not what Gary Gygax built the game to be.
First of all, I don't really care what Gary wanted, because I'm here in the 21st century and he's back there, and my hobby and my friends and my wife and my family are interested in this hobby. And there's tons of new and interesting books coming out in the hobby. There's a thriving community of people making YouTubes about the hobby. And I think that I will remember Gary as an important founder, and I enjoy looking through his writing in the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. Okay, enough said. But here's another fundamental misconception. What is an epic hero? Does an epic hero die of putting his ear to a door and an earworm getting in there? Does an epic hero starve to death in the third level of Castle Greyhawk? kind of just looking for wealth. Castle Zaggig was published by Gary at the end of his life, and probably represents something close to what he thought of D&D, kind of at the height of when he was creating the game. And there's plenty of senseless death, there's plenty of gonzo, and there's plenty of sort of less than epic circumstances that your characters may be befallen by. Epicness is something that happens over time, and the threat of senseless death, the threat of, well, it's not Gary. And it's not the beginning of the hobby. And so I hope that you've enjoyed this sort of more interesting exploration of a more direct reply to someone. And I hope that you've appreciated how I really wanted to go to task and sort of present an alternative of civility to some of the things that were said in that video. And especially with regards to the idea that people shouldn't be doing something or not. Oh, please. This is a hobby that relies on volunteerism and enthusiasm and trying to audit and trying to speak with that kind of voice of authority when just kind of upvotes, likes, subscribes, people just typing into YouTube what they're looking for and finding it. It seems to work just fine.
Pregens are a corruption of power, an absolute corruption of power. Pregens should never, ever, ever be used. And if you are sitting at a table with pregens, know for a fact you are sitting with a lesser dungeon master. Thank you.
So politely, Mr. Garibay, I would ask you, if there is something that is successful in the hobby, perhaps it is there for a reason. And perhaps many people do love it and enjoy it. Pre-generated characters are one of those things. I'm the Complex Games Apologist.